Coming up, this week's deal between the UK and the EU. The Daily Mail and Kemi Badenoch scream surrender, and Farage is foaming at the mouth like it's 2016. But what's really going on with this so-called Great Brexit Reset? Keir Starmer, meanwhile, calls it, with absolutely no sense of irony, unprecedented access to EU markets. So what is it? A betrayal? A breakthrough? Or just another Starmer fudge in the never-ending saga of British decline? Stay tuned. About that Starmer quote, let's begin with a bit of fact-checking, shall we? This week, our Prime Minister stood at the podium, his trademark charisma dialed up to 3, and declared that his new deal with the EU would provide unprecedented access to EU markets. Sorry, what? Pardon? Unprecedented access. We had full access to the EU market prior to the Tory Brexit. Total, unrestricted, tariff-free, frictionless access. You don't get more precedented than that. We were a full member inside the club. Now we've come to an agreement with the security guard to let us sneak in through the fire exit, and now we're bragging about how we've got better access to the members' lounge than ever before. Now, don't get me wrong, I do welcome this week's agreement as far as it goes. But this is not a rejoiner's dream. It's not even a proper reset. It's a timid nudge back towards sanity, a course correction, a few degrees closer to reality after a decade of the Brexit lunatics running the asylum. A sign, finally, that the Labour government has at least stopped pretending that Brexit has been a success. And if this reset goes to plan, further negotiations will surely follow over the next few years, or even months. They'll have to, because we're still a long way from where we need to be on Brexit. This deal is nowhere near enough to undo the whole Brexit shitshow. It's not even about reversing the damage so far caused by Brexit, it's more about managing the bleeding. The political equivalent of reaching for a band-aid after you've cut off your own arm. But I do remain positive and pleased with this step in the right direction. And what makes me pretty sure that overall it's very good news is when I look at the monsters who are really upset by it. Boris Johnson, for example, the man, along with Farage, most responsible for causing the greatest harm to this country since the Second World War. The world's second most famous liar, after the fascist Donald Trump, labelled Prime Minister Keir Starmer as the orange, ball-chewing, manacled gimp of Brussels. The thought that someone like Johnson was once British Prime Minister is quite shocking. He argued that the agreement sacrifices UK fishing interests and subjects the country to EU regulations without sufficient input, effectively rendering Britain, in his words, a non-voting punk of the EU Commission. Something else he shares with Trump. Accuse the other side of your own failures. The deal this week merely rolls over the deal on fishing in UK waters that Johnson himself negotiated 5-6 years ago. And as for saying that Starmer's deal subjects the country to EU regulations without sufficient input, well, a better definition of Johnson's own Brexit deal doesn't exist. The main effect of Johnson's Brexit was to deliver precisely that, still having to follow EU rules in order to export to our largest export market, but no longer having any say whatsoever in those rules. It was Johnson's Brexit that changed the UK's status from rule maker to rule taker. And Johnson wasn't alone in the chamber of horrors reacting to the deal this week. Kemi Badenoch called it a surrender, still sticking to the Tory default posture from 2016 as seeing our European neighbours as the enemy rather than allies. The Express cried betrayal. But as I've said, the good ship Betrayal sailed back in 2016. That's when the real betrayal happened, when Boris Johnson sold a fantasy to the British people for his own personal gain. When the Vote Leave campaign promised sunlit uplands and £350 million a week for the NHS, knowing full well it was utter bollocks. But 9 years later, the current leader of the UK's fourth most popular party, according to the latest YouGov poll, is still fighting on the same Boris Johnson battleground from 2016. No, Kemi, the betrayal didn't happen this week. It happened then. And if you had a shred of integrity, you'd be backing any attempt, however modest, to clean up the mess that your own party made. No wonder the Tories' poll ratings continue to decline as they continue to talk Brexit wibble, sticking pencils up their noses and wearing their Brexit underpants on their heads. Away from the rhetoric from the Tories, Farage's gang and the right-wing tabloids, let's try and take a more balanced view, shall we? Starmer's New Deal includes some movement on food standards, youth mobility and fisheries. Each of these concessions came with a price. Boris Johnson's fisheries agreement, for instance, has been extended for another 12 years, mainly because Starmer wanted the deal providing frictionless trade for food and agriculture. That's the prize he always had his eye on. But to get it, he had to bend, and bend he did. On youth mobility, he caved to French pressure. I say caved, or perhaps I should say responded, as I think that's an incredibly positive shift in the British stance on freedom of movement. On fisheries, though, he failed to consult with the devolved administrations in Wales and Scotland. No wonder First Minister of Wales, Eluned Morgan, is fuming. And in Scotland, External Affairs Secretary Angus Robertson has welcomed the closer cooperation between the UK and the EU, but said that not involving the Scottish Government in any negotiations was an affront to devolution. That aside, most industry bodies and businesses have reacted overwhelmingly positively to a deal that appears to be an improvement to the Tory Brexit, but is still nowhere near enough. Why? Because we're still not back to full freedom of movement. We're not even close. The youth mobility scheme being floated is reciprocal, limited and capped. For most Brits, their freedom of movement rights, which Priti Patel so gleefully took away from us as part of her role in Brexit, remain stolen.
At this defining moment in our country's history, I have a particular responsibility when it comes to taking back control. It is to end the free movement of people once and for all.
Thankfully, as a French speaker married to an EU citizen, my personal escape route is still open should Reform 2025 Limited unthinkably win the next election. But I'm one of the very lucky ones, I appreciate. Loss of freedom of movement rights has hit many people's plans hard. Starmer's deal doesn't impact that situation. It's a government trying to sound pragmatic without doing anything really radical. Why? Because Farage. Starmer seems terrified of Reform 2025 Limited, yet the latest YouGov surveys show that only 4% of 2024 Reform voters would even consider voting Labour, and only 9% of 2024 Labour voters would consider switching to Reform. Whatever else you say about Starmer, ignoring data like that, he's a pretty rubbish politician, isn't he? He's still trapped in the Brexit frame. He's still trying to win over imaginary red wall voters who think Nigel Farage is a man of the people instead of a hedge fund frog with a fag and a pint glass. And so, instead of leading public opinion, Starmer's chasing it. Instead of making the case for Europe, he's muttering 2016 style about making Brexit work. The trouble is, it doesn't, and was never going to. The British public know it. Poll after poll shows growing regret. Businesses know it. Just ask any exporter. Young people know it. They've lost their right to live, work and love across 27 countries. Surely Starmer knows it too in his heart, if he has one, that is. So why won't he say it? Perhaps because, due to a lack of positive pro-European leadership, Britain is still in the grip of post-Brexit trauma. We're governed by the ghost of a referendum that tore the country apart and settled absolutely nothing. And until a Prime Minister with courage says out loud that even the idea of Cameron's Tory Brexit referendum was a catastrophic mistake, we're going to keep circling the same drain. The real scandal isn't that Starmer's being attacked from the right, it's that he's not being challenged enough by us on the left. From the pro-Europeans in his own party, from the young people who want their future back, from all of us who believe Britain is stronger, safer and better off inside the EU, not just peeking through the windows like an embarrassed ex. So, what now? If this so-called reset is to mean anything, it has to be the start of something much bigger. A realignment with our European neighbours, a reckoning with the Brexit lies, a reawakening of our sense of internationalism, a full cooperation with our geographic and cultural neighbours, particularly in a world where our traditional ally, the United States, has descended into fascism. I want to see Britain back as a full member of the EU in my lifetime, so my verdict on Keir Starmer's deal this week: well done for starting something, but don't stop here. Don't pat yourself on the back for just stepping on the first rung of the ladder. Don't let fear of the right keep you stuck in Brexit purgatory. You have a rare chance to put country before political cowardice. And if you don't, you won't make it as leader until the next general election. You need to start making the case for rejoining not just the single market and the customs union, but in the values, the principles, the defence and the shared destiny of Europe.
Welcome to the Brexit, sir. I'm sorry.
Oh my God.